Hello, I'm Haslinda. I'm a TV anchor for Bloomberg Markets Asia. Truth be told, access to medicine has always been unfair, unequal, and it took COVID-19 for the world to be called to action to help the most vulnerable. COVAX, which is the Global Sharing Initiative, is forcing a redefinition of what is acceptable, what is ethical as we navigate the vaccination process. COVAX rolled out recently amid allegations rich nations have hindered access to supply as manufacturers struggle to produce the billions of doses needed to vaccinate the world. Now, India, as you may know, is key to the global vaccine rollout. The Serum Institute of India is the world's biggest vaccine manufacturer. It is expected to produce about 50% of the doses this year. And we are excited to have with us CEO Adar Poonawalla, and it is his father who founded the Serum Institute. Adar, thank you for being here.
Pleasure to be talking to you and to the audience. Good morning and good evening to everybody out there.
And Adar, the Serum Institute has started shipping vaccines for COVAX, but 10 months since it was formed, it's been pretty challenging for COVAX to get its own supplies. Vaccine nationalism is still front and center, still very rampant. First of all, give us a sense of how bad it is. What's the pace at which COVAX is ramping up its purchases of the AstraZeneca vaccine, for example?
So, we've got agreements for hundreds of millions of doses with COVAX for the AZ vaccine and other vaccines like Novavax. Thanks to the stockpiling that I did, in 2020, at the end of 2020, we had a lot of doses. That gave us a head start. In fact, right now, we have supplied more than 50% of the doses that COVAX has received in the last 2 to 3 months. And, we're trying to scale up as fast as we can. And COVAX is doing a great job in trying to equitably distribute these vaccine doses to as many nations. And, between COVAX and some other countries, we've already reached about 50 countries globally.
Adar, we did a poll asking if wealthy countries with access to these vaccines, whether they should prioritize their citizens or send to the most needy nations, or perhaps try to balance the needs of both the nations and those in need. And we found that 51% are asking for a balance. 42% say that perhaps they need to prioritize their own citizens. Are you surprised by the findings of the poll?
No, I'm not surprised at all. In fact, that's a good number because everywhere you go, the majority of people believe that they should vaccinate their own country first. And they struggle to understand sometimes how important it is to open up economies in other countries because, every country is dependent on imports and exports. And today, because of the decisions partly that I've taken, my focus has been on poorer nations and getting supply out there to somehow tip the balance between what you're seeing going on, where rich nations originally, because they had the funding and there was nothing wrong with that, they were just trying to protect their own citizens, bought up a lot of doses. And that's where COVAX and Serum Institute is playing a very key role in getting doses out to the poorer nations.
You talk about the rich nations. We have U.S. President Joe Biden committing about $4 billion to COVAX. To what extent can that funding address the dire state of global vaccine inequality when the issue is not really the lack of funding, it is a lack of supply?
Absolutely. So, more than the funding, it's down to the manufacturers, really, on whom they want to prioritize. So if a Western manufacturer, Pfizer, Moderna, wants to sell to a richer nation at a higher price, there's nothing really one can do about it. I mean, they're also trying to balance out, their investor relations and other things to provide a good return and be ethical at the same time. And for us, because we're a privately listed company, I can be as ethical as I want to be with my entire stock. We're selling at an average price of $3 a dose. For our vaccines. So, to give as much equitable access as we can. So it's not just the price, it's supplying the product, to these nations which can't get access to these other vaccine manufacturers as well.
I guess the question is, what is the way forward? I mean, some COVAX members, the likes of Indonesia, Egypt, Pakistan, they've gone directly to Beijing to secure their own supplies themselves. But the thing is, that could encourage other countries to do the same, strike their own bilateral deals, and that may complicate things.
No, absolutely, and that's why Seth Berkley, has been voicing this point that if you do that and have bilaterals, that undermines the whole objective of COVAX, which is all these countries coming together for equitable distribution. But what's happening is that a lot of these countries, whilst they wait, for COVAX to deliver the doses, they're getting impatient. And some countries are wanting to pay or willing to pay to skip the queue. And we're trying to educate and convince everybody that we should just be a little more patient and let COVAX do its job.
It's hard to be patient when the situation is desperate, especially for some countries. Like you said, there are enough manufacturers. It takes time to scale up. Can COVAX then meet the goal of 2 billion doses by the end of the year?
I think end of this year will probably be challenging. It may spill over by a few months because, there are a lot of manufacturers who haven't been able to supply to their commitments and timelines, including Serum Institute to a certain extent, because, when India changed its view and mind that it wanted to consume a lot of doses, we've had to dedicate a lot of our capacity, which was not originally planned for India, now is going to the Indian citizens. We're trying to balance it out as much as possible. But again, for the first few months, we are being directed to prioritize supplies to India and certain other countries that also have a high disease burden. So yes, I mean, it is going to take another 3 to 4 months for COVAX to really pick up in the large amount of doses that they will get from all different manufacturers, again, because of vaccine nationalism. And now a new thing that has started, raw materials nationalism. So what the US, for example, has done, and I've sent this message to all the decision makers in the US, that please do not put a ban on critical raw materials that other global vaccine manufacturers need to make vaccines. So under the Defense Act in the US, you've got a ban on, plastic bags, filters, and certain other critical items that, we're all dependent on. So that may also slow down vaccine manufacturing capacity in other parts of the world, including India.
Speaking of the U.S., Adar, we know that the U.S. recently voiced concerns about supply bottlenecks. Is there a resolution in sight? What's the scale of disruption here? What are we talking about?
So, I mean, with the Biden administration, I'm hoping that they will look at a more global view, whether it's raw materials or even vaccines made out of the U.S. The previous administration had decided that they want to only buy vaccines, if they were made in the U.S. Now, if they face challenges on that, they might have to change that strategy and look outward toward other manufacturers, to get more vaccines to the U.S.
One issue that's complicating things actually is the regulatory approval process. It's pretty disparate. I mean, why are the US, the UK, some other regions unable to agree on the process in conjunction with the WHO? I mean, how do you get greater cooperation in such desperate times? What's your take? What can be done?
In fact, that has been my point for the last 2 months, because I realized this as soon as we were licensed in India. It took us 2 months to go to every region and get qualified, by their regulation, whether it's WHO, anyone else. You've got Canada, US, the European Union, the UK MHRA, and the WHO, which looks at the rest of the world in terms of, regulation to be so that you can supply the doses. Now, this is still not a missed opportunity if we can all get together, come to a certain quality standard, because essentially the data from the clinical trials and the manufacturing is the same that we're submitting to all these different regulators. So if they can all come together only during the time of this pandemic or any other future pandemic to have one harmonized platform and quality level and format in which to submit the data and analyze the data, that will shave off months for all different manufacturers, including us, for our new vaccines going forward. That will definitely prepone a lot of the supplies that can be made. So I hope that happens. I think they're talking about it, but we haven't seen real action on that front, if I'm to be perfectly honest so far.
If it does happen, how soon do you think? Could it happen within the next few months, by the end of the year?
I think it's possible if we all act now. In about 3 months, that is possible. And, after that, everything is going to get so much more streamlined. You're going to shave off months in terms of supply. I'll give you an example. On the 2nd of January, 2021 is when we got licensed by the Indian regulator under the emergency use license. We had to wait 2 months to supply doses to COVAX because, we weren't aligned with WHO in India as a common regulation. So what the idea would be that if we know that there are about 10 or 15 major countries that are the main ones manufacturing the vaccines, from China, India, Russia, United States, Europe, UK, and a couple of others, South Korea, for example, then, you just need to qualify the NRAs of those countries in a pandemic so that anything approved in those countries can immediately be used anywhere else on the planet. Imagine how much, time we would save in being able to then ship doses out.
Only you talk about Novavax. Could you give us a timeline for when you expect to start distributing Novavax doses? Where are you in that process?
So right now we're going to begin the clinical trials in India, a bridging study, which will bring us into August for a launch. But the good news is that we're going to start stockpiling the product, starting in the month of April, so that April, May, June, July, August, we have a huge stockpile, which we can then distribute the minute we're licensed, because we still have to do a bridging study and we have to still wait for the final efficacy and clinical trial for Novavax to come through. And they've shown excellent results at the 89% efficacy trial that they've already concluded or about to conclude. And after that, we do the small bridging study in India and we launch in August. That's the plan now.
Right now, vaccines are being, I guess, supplied to governments. When do you expect private operators, such as hospitals, to be able to buy vaccines directly from you instead of through the government?
So, this is an ongoing issue which we've taken up at the highest levels with the government, because the vaccine industry today is providing vaccines at a very low subsidized price to the government, at least in India. And what we're trying to do is open it up to the private sector where corporates and others can commercially agree on a price and negotiate with manufacturers, whereby they can, immunize their workforce and other groups and sections that today don't have access to the vaccine. But if you were to look at the point of view of the government, which also has a valid point, that they want to first vaccinate the elderly, the frontline workers, the people who are most at risk. So it's a tough call for any government or anyone to make. And we're hoping in 3 or 4 months from today that we open it up and get a free license to sell directly to the hospitals and to the private market and corporates, so that'll speed up the opening of the economy. But that, I think, will only be possible, as per what the government has indicated, once we cover a certain critical portion of the population in terms of the elderly and the frontline healthcare workers, etc. So that's where we are at the moment.
Adar, there are also murmurings that you're preparing to export vaccine to the EU. Could you confirm that?
I really can't comment on that. We're under confidentiality. And so I won't comment on the UK and Europe at the moment. I think we will leave that for the AstraZeneca team to comment on, because it's in their purview.
It's been more than a year since we started battling the pandemic. How prepared are we to fight the next pandemic, or is it too early to tell?
No, absolutely. I'll tell you straight off, we are far better positioned now from what we have learned and the infrastructure that we know that we need to have in the future. So if it's hospitals, PPE kits, masks, the testing infrastructure, when this pandemic hit everywhere in the world, we could hardly do a few thousand tests in the country. Now India is one of the largest in performing tests, manufacturing personal protective equipment, and now vaccines, and eventually maybe even some cures and drugs. So I think now it's very evident and clear what we need to have in place. I mean, we can never say we're going to be 100% prepared for the next pandemic, because we don't know what kind of viruses or bacteria might emerge. But at least we now know that we have enough partners who can make the products. We have made enough partnerships today to handle, as I said, the testing and other things. And now we know, and we have funding mechanisms in place which can immediately go down to, and provide working capital to manufacturers and testing institutions to be able to scale up rapidly. So, I think these are all positives, and I think we're probably, twice as capable and prepared now compared to what we were a year ago. And as we learn more lessons, we'll be further ready. And, I have some suggestions where I've made certain suggestions for keeping idle vaccine capacity available for the future. And I've been offering that to other nations. I'm building the world's largest pandemic facility. In 2 years, it'll be ready to make 2 billion doses annually. And I'm urging governments to take a piece of that so that they never have to be in this situation in the future, even for these new mutant strains or variants coming about where you need new vaccines, or any other new outbreaks and pandemics, smaller pandemics that might happen regionally, that are most probably going to happen over the next 10 to 15 years because of the way we travel and climate change, etc. So, these are the strategies that we need to now look at to further prepare ourselves for the next pandemic.
On that very optimistic note, Adar Poonawalla, we thank you for your insights. And before we go, just something to tell you about. We have the Bloomberg Vaccine Tracker. It counts doses administered around the world on a daily basis. We have a team of 50 journalists combing through government websites, statements, other official sources to create the most up-to-date vaccine rollout globally. Do check it out. And on that note again, thank you.